We're going to talk a little bit about um, a concept called the school to prison pipeline in this video. And I've wanted to make this long form video for a while. I've had a lot of people ask, like, can you do some more YouTube stuff? And honestly, I've been in my own way because I think it has to be too pretty. So I said this morning, it's the first week of school just ended here where I live. Let's go ahead and start talking about this topic. And you know what? Let's hope that the content overrides the prettiness. I haven't updated these slides in several years, so we'll see how it looks. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is TJ Rumler. I'm a licensed social worker in Greenville, South Carolina. I currently work full-time at an adolescent PHP program. I guess that's redundant. Providing therapy and helping to run that for adolescents with mental health issues. I also own a training and consulting firm around trauma-informed care and resilience, where I work with educators, nonprofit leaders, and just anybody who's wanting to learn more about how our past can impact our present and how we can take better ownership over that to have healthy relationships with ourselves and with those that we serve. I'm also a former TEDx speaker and trauma-informed specialist for one of the largest school districts in the country here in South Carolina. And I just love the work. As we start this conversation, I want you to think about we always talk about our why, but I want you to think about a student. Maybe it's a student that you've worked with as an educator in the nonprofit where you serve. Maybe it's your own kid or a kid you've mentored, but somebody who you really want the best for them. Bonus points in this exercise if they're still school age. And I want us to really get down to the fact that every interaction that we have with them and every interaction that other adults have with this kid, with this child, is going to get them closer to the goals and the dreams that we have for them and that they have for themselves, or further away. We're always having impact on their lives. And as Dr. Bruce Perry, who is somebody you'll probably hear me quote, he's one of my professional, I won't say mentor, but inspirations. He always talks about these brief therapeutic moments that we can have with a child. And a lot of times, and especially in public school settings, I've seen the opposite, these non-therapeutic, these small, minute, microscopic moments to us that can have severe and long-lasting impact and damage to not just the educational future of a child, but the social and emotional future of a child. So when we talk about this issue or this concept of exclusionary discipline and school to prison pipeline, let's keep that in mind, that to us things might just be a suspension or ISS, but depending on what happens with that, how it's done, how restoration and repair are handled, it can mean the world to the future of a child. Being able to work as a therapist in a school setting and as somebody who's served in schools from a third party kind of perspective, and if you're a teacher, go ahead and get ready to roll your eyes, but I have the privilege of getting to work with kids in a smaller environment, in a more controlled environment. And because of that, I'm often getting the chance to ask questions that teachers and administrators might not always have the time, the capacity, or the ability to do. And so some of the things that I want to share with you are direct quotes that have come from kids at different environments that I'm able to ask. And I ask questions like, how do you know when a teacher or an adult cares about you? What's one thing that, most adults misunderstand about being in middle school? Questions like that, and really give them the opportunity to kind of, talk through what that's like for them. And here's a couple of quotes, and I'll pause to give you a moment to read and reflect. I get into trouble so that I can go to ISS. It's better because at least I don't get yelled out. Get out of your head for a minute and think about, how does that feel in your body when you read that? And that child, that middle school kid, and just behind the curtain, this was a 6th grade young man, 12 years old, and doesn't like being in class because he gets yelled at. How does it feel for you to be yelled at by somebody that you care about or somebody you don't know that has power over you? The older we get, the less patience teachers have with us. Think about walking around with that mindset. How does that impact how you navigate school? I mean, I got to go to jail sometime, right? We call this in my world a strong external locus of control, feeling like you don't have power over your own life and your future. This young man was in middle school, and I saw him getting arrested by the SRO, and these were the words out of his mouth. So I want you to just kind of get yourself into the mindset of that. Now, I like to use a framework so you know that I'm not just pulling things out of the air. So what we like to use are the 4 R's of trauma-informed care from SAMHSA, the federal agency that oversees and provides a lot of training on mental health and substance abuse treatment. And so we'll use the 4 R's of trauma-informed care. The first 3 are other trainings that I offer. You can look at the website, tjrumler.com, if you want to learn more about those. But today, one of the main things we're going to be talking about is to resist re-traumatization. And we want to make sure that we're doing things on purpose to act in a trauma-informed way, so that if we are working with students, and spoiler alert, you are, who have experienced trauma, we're not doing things to exacerbate that and to make things even worse for them. One of the ways that we do that systemically, we're all culpable if we work and serve in a public school environment or that system around it, is exclusionary discipline. And for the sake of this conversation, we're going to define exclusionary discipline as any type of action that removes or excludes a student from his or her usual educational setting. All right. So that can involve ISS, out of school suspension, alternative school placement, expulsion. Even sometimes when we just pull a kid out and then don't explain what's going on and we just stick them back in there and there's a lot of confusion going on. So that's what we're going to talk about with exclusion. Now, in my TED Talk several years ago was about this concept, and I did a lot of research, and I still do a lot of research on the concept of exclusionary discipline. Some of the things that we know we're not accomplishing through exclusionary discipline is engaging parents at a higher rate. It is not shown to deter future unhelpful or unhealthy behavior. It does not make schools safer. In fact, one of the resources, I don't even think it's in these slides, but the United States Secret Service, of all people, they do an annual report on averting school shooting. So they study incidents where somebody had been planning a school shooting, it was stopped, and what was going on. And so they give all these, and you can Google this, they do all these recommendations. And one of the things they say is suspensions and expulsions are not making it less likely for violence to happen in a school. And it doesn't even make financial sense. If we were to take the amount of money that it costs to lock up a child in the Department of Juvenile Justice and invest that into proactive social and emotional, mental health, community-based services, we would have such a greater return on our investment. One of the things they do is actually schools with higher numbers of suspension, higher rates of expulsion have lower test scores. It marginalizes certain groups that are already on the outskirts of our communities. It actually increases the chance of juvenile justice and criminal justice system involvement as an adult. We know that if kids are starting to get suspended at a young age, it changes. I know where your brain's going, and it's not just because, oh yeah, well, that's early signs that they're a criminal. It can change. Like if you call somebody a criminal enough, if you call somebody bad enough, they're going to internalize that, and you're going to see that manifest throughout their life. These are the students who are in special education, students who are LGBTQ. See, obviously I need to update that slide. I+ are, and Black and Latinx students are incredibly higher at risk and higher targeted by exclusionary discipline. If you're in public education and you're an administrator, I challenge you to pull up your district's data. If you have time to look at it by school, bonus points. You probably don't. But just look at suspensions, expulsions, look at it by grade level, by elementary, middle, high, and then look at what subgroups are more highly suspended and affected by these. And then come at me if your Black students aren't the highest number. I would be amazed. Every district I've ever worked with, that's been the result. And then I challenge yourself to ask why. Why is that the case? If you have your hypotheses and your theories around that, put it in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. And honestly, y'all, all the higher education organizations, mental health organizations, don't support it. All of these agencies, and the last I checked, I should say, things are changing in our country, especially with federal agencies. But the last I checked, all of these organizations on the slide have made public stances against exclusionary discipline, including out-of-school suspension and expulsion. This is kind of a funny question I like to ask, and obviously you don't have to do this, but what's the most petty thing you or someone you know ever got suspended for or got ISS? I'd love to know, because I think just kind of being able to laugh about this too can show us like how sometimes we can just get in our feelings and make bad decisions that can impact kids. And it's like, are these things really what we want to be fighting? I was working in an attendance job one time, like truancy. And there was a young girl who was, I think she was about 15, high school student, had a history of chronic truancy. And we finally had done enough work, got enough supports in her life that she was coming to school on time. And she had been to school 5-6 days in a row for a whole day, which was a win. And one day she pulled her cell phone out in class and the school suspended her for it. And I can't wrap my head around that. Like, we have this child back in class and now we want to put them out. And I just used the word chronic absenteeism. We define chronic absenteeism, if you don't know, as missing 10% or more of the school year. And this is regardless of why. So I don't care if you're skipping school or if you're out with a chronic illness. If your rear end is not in a seat in school for more than 10% of your days, we define that as chronic absenteeism. And there's tons of data. You can look at attendanceworks.org, or pick your poison, of data that shows if children are chronically absent, grades go down, academic outcomes go down. All these different things are affected. A lot of things that we don't want to see, right? And here's some data from attendanceworks.com that shows that starting in 8th grade, if a child is chronically absent even one time, one school year, they have a 36% higher chance of dropping out of school. And look, as it goes up, there's a clear dose-response relationship with chronic absenteeism and high school dropout. And here's one of a school district that I had worked with and done some consulting. They gave us the opportunity to look at their entire district data one year on the senior class senior class in high school. And based on attendance, you can see what the average GPA was. It matters to be in a seat. And I say all that because, and I'll borrow from Nick Saban, who, I'm a South Carolina and an FSU fan, so I'm not an Alabama fan. But, the man, he gave a really powerful speech. And if you Google Nick Saban second chances, you can find it. And it's like, where do you want these kids to be? Sometimes we pick the most petty fights when we claim that we are evidence-based, data-driven in education. But yet we know that suspending kids makes them miss time in a seat. And let's be real, most children that we're suspending are not going home and doing their assignment. They're not. I wouldn't have when I was a teenager. You wouldn't have either. We are putting their academic future at risk if we're not trying everything we can before we suspend a student. And I'll take this opportunity to go ahead. Yep, plenty of people are rolling their eyes. I'm not saying that we allow extreme violence in our schools. Obviously, there's things and times when children are going to have to be suspended to maintain and protect the safety of everybody in the building. I also would challenge you to go look at the things that we're suspending kids for and see what it looks like. The school to prison pipeline, or some people would say the school to confinement pipeline, is a national trend where children are funneled out of public system into juvenile and criminal justice systems. It is real, the data is there, and we know that there is a correlation between the way students are suspended in regards to race and gender, and how people show up in the adult prison system, whether it's jail or prison, sorry. And if you look at some of this data from the ACLU, we see the correlation between suspension in schools. If you can see that, right? Almost half of public school students are white, only 13% are black, yet they're making about the equal number of suspensions. And if we flip that to the prison system, look at that. Y'all, we have to do a better job of holding our kids in school, especially in the South, my Southern family. Black students down here are incredibly affected at a higher rate by suspension. We have to do something about this. And I have my stances and I have my opinions, but you can search your own heart as to why that's happening. LGBTQ students also, Hispanic students, suspended at a higher rate. There were 84 districts in 2015 where 100% of students that were suspended were Black. Y'all, we can't do this. This is not right. Many schools that we know and we work with have zero tolerance policies, and that's not the way human behavior is. There's always context. We live in the gray, and these policies are going to drive disconnection between teachers, between administrators, between social workers, between school counselors, and their students. And I'd like for us to ask this question, like when we implement a policy and when we stand on a policy, whose needs is that policy serving? Whose needs is that practice serving? If it is harming the child and it's simply making our lives more convenient, is that really worth the end result? Is the juice really worth the squeeze on that? And I believe it comes down to blame. And I believe it just comes down to blame. You know, Brene Brown, who is an incredibly accomplished author, social worker, therapist, speaker, she talks about blame being simply the discharge of discomfort and pain. And I think sometimes she even says that sometimes it's easier to blame somebody else than blaming myself or to blame no one, because I need that. And sometimes really it's just nobody's at fault. Sometimes this doesn't have to be a punitive situation. And I'll borrow from Dr. Becky Bailey, who is the founder of a program called Conscious Discipline. Many of you may be using Conscious Discipline at your school. And I love how she says discipline's not something you do to a child. Discipline is something you develop in a child. Discipline comes from the word disciple, to teach. And there's a great resource. In fact, I think there's an updated version of this book now by Hannigan and Hannigan. It's called Don't Suspend Me. What's some alternative things that we can do? Because I've also had educators, and I love y'all. If you're a teacher, an administrator, anybody that works in a school and you're watching this, I love you. I'm not coming for you. I'm not blaming you. I know that the work that we do is hard. And I've had administrators and teachers tell me, I don't want to suspend a kid. I just don't know what else to do. I don't have any other tools in my toolbox. And this is one resource that if you want to check it out, gives you some of those tools. And Hannigan and Hannigan break down that a truly effective disciplinary action and approach have these three elements. And I love the way they give us a framework, that they're instructional. Have we given the student some new tools, some new strategies, whether it's internal, maybe it's emotionally regulatory, being able to check in with how am I feeling, what am I doing with that, or maybe it's new language or new, like a place to go to separate yourself from something. Have we given them time to reflect on what happened? Have we given them an opportunity and a pathway towards restoration? How many times have you suspended a kid, maybe even expelled a student from school, and when they come back, the conversation is never had with whoever was affected on how do we make this right? Relationships are never repaired. So there's ways that we can do this, right? There's trainings. We can do some restorative practices training. Read this book if you don't have the money for a training, but look on the website, tjrumler.com, and there's tons of trainings that we can do. If you're not available to bring us into your school, we can recommend people. There's tons of resources. Look at the iirp.edu for some restorative practices, free resources. But I encourage you to please look into some alternative ways, some restorative ways that we can bring discipline to our schools. Hopefully you have somebody or a team, even better, in your school or in your district that is working on MTSS, so multi-tiered layers of supports. Lord, side needs updating, bless me. But when we think about these tiers, it's like, I think a lot of us do, we have it backwards. We do pretty well with the tier 3 interventions. What are the things that we're doing for a few students? We spend so much of our energy on those, you know the term, high flyers. But if we would invest more time, energy, effort, resources into tier 1, what are we doing for all the students and all the staff in our building? We would yield greater results. Now, I'm asked a lot to come into schools and do classroom behavior, classroom management, de-escalation training. And I've had more than one school be surprised and maybe even unhappy because we spend most of the time talking about adults. And we talk about dysregulation. And we talk about how dysregulation on the adult can create dysregulation for the child. And in fact, will. If you are a dysregulated adult and you come into your classroom, your group setting, your office, and are in a jacked up place, your energy's all over the place, and you can't get a hold on it, it's going to bleed over into the nervous system of that child, and you're going to see a higher level of behaviors that are hard to manage, lower levels of academic performance, kids who are just not as nice to each other, because we also see that in the adults in the building. You also see this within small groups of kids. If you have classrooms that are too crowded, if you have adults that are walking around and not modeling kindness, there's all kinds of, again, this is a deeper conversation than a few minutes, but a lot of this is going to show up like oppositional defiant disorder, like, I don't know, conduct disorder. There's so many like disorders that we like to throw around that can be explained when we really can dig into the environment. Here's an example of how that can look. You have a kid, you probably already have one in mind, that might come up to an adult and start cussing, being defiant. Love that word. Just kidding. And it can go one or two ways. It can go a lot of ways. But if I'm a regulated adult, I've slept well, my basic needs are met, my connections are in line in my life, I can use all those skills because, you know, the cortex, the top part of the brain, is where empathy lives. I can access that and I can use it, and I can pause, I can breathe, I can get down on that student's level, and I can give them time to come down to me. Time to regulate. I can relate with them. We can connect. And then after we get to a point of that, we can have a conversation. But if I'm dysregulated, I might do something way different. I might reciprocate what's going on. You're not going to talk to me like that. Go to Mr. Smith's office. You're not going to be acting like that in my class. We've all seen it. And while two things can be true here, that behavior from that child may not be acceptable, and we may have to put some consequences in place. But rupturing the relationship in the process is not going to make things better. And this is where I come back. What do we want for Timothy? What do we want for that child? Do we want our interactions to get him or her or they closer to their outcomes or their goals? Or do we want to drive it further away? All these little interactions are going to affect that. I mentioned a few minutes ago restorative practices. One of the ways that we can change a school culture is by implementing tier 1, 2, and 3 restorative practices. I say that clearly. Please, if you are a school that wants to do this, whether it's TJ Rumler Consulting doing your training or another group, please make sure that you implement this at a school level with a good amount of buy-in from your whole staff. Because what happens, I've seen it many times, you'll have a few people in the school that really get on fire for restorative practices, but the only thing that is done is that tier 3 level. And so we start having restorative circles, and what it ends up looking like in real life is relationships are not developed. Most of the school level teachers and staff are not on board, or may not even be trained to know, what are we talking about? What is this new language? Johnny throws a chair, or Johnny cusses out a teacher. What the teacher sees is the administrator pulls the student out, school counselor pulls the student out, and then 10 minutes later the kid shows up and nothing's ever said. Now your teacher isn't feeling supported, and that rightfully so, because everybody doesn't see the big picture. We have to do this at a school level. So 80% of restorative practices happens before anything goes wrong. Just remember that. Most of this work happens before any relationship rupture has happened. So again, we can check that out. Happy to provide you with some resources and some training if needed. I love this quote here, y'all, because this doesn't come from like one of us crunchy therapists or school counselor. This came from a school resource officer, and he said, "I've seen miracles happen where we had two enemies shaking hands." I have a good friend who's a SRO at a school where I used to work, and I got similar feedback after we did a restorative circle for a young man that was coming back from an expulsion, and we had a very powerful circle. And that SRO, my friend, he told me, "I'm glad I was able to participate in that circle because it wasn't just restorative for the student, it was restorative for me, because now I'm able to see him in a different light, and my attitude with him is changing going forward." As we're starting to wrap up, I want to talk about relationship-based offenses. We mentioned earlier that suspensions still have to happen in our schools, and there's going to be time expulsions do. But in my experience, most of the schools that I've worked, I'm not going to assign, roughly, I'd say over half of all exclusionary discipline happens for things like refusal to obey, defiance, things like this that are very subjective. Like what respect looks like to me is different than what it looks like to you. And here's what we have to understand. Feeling disrespected is way different than someone being disrespectful. And we have to be able to operationalize and define what these behaviors are in order to be consistent across our implementation of disciplinary policies. Because just because I might not like something isn't necessarily best practice to remove a child from an educational setting that they are mandated to be at, especially when I'm the adult. And I will die on this hill, but we have to do a better job of checking our own stuff at the door, and then also giving room for restoration and repair of relationships and I'll say this till the day I die, do everything we can to implement restorative, holistic disciplinary interventions before we get to suspension, exclusion, and other exclusionary policies. I've also seen amazing results from teaching mindfulness in schools and practicing mindfulness in schools. The Holistic Life Foundation in Baltimore, they've worked with schools where they have almost completely eradicated suspension because of how integrated mindfulness and breathing practices are throughout the entire school. People learn how to breathe. People learn how to stay centered. People learn how to, in the words of Viktor Frankl, put a little bit of space in between stimulus and response to be able to make a wise choice. Again, these are things that we can provide training on. If you're interested, visit tjbrumler.com. And we all say, all students, but we have to do a better job. We have to, and again, we're moving further away from this language being supported, but we have to serve all students. The data shows that Black and brown students, LGBTQI students are being not served. In fact, we're actively harming them. Maybe not with our interpersonal relationships, but the systems that we work in are actively causing negative outcomes for these students. So we have to do a better job. I think we are mandated. You know, doctors take the Hippocratic Oath. I think when I came into the field of social work, I truly feel like that I want to help people, but if I can't help them, I at least don't want to harm them. And we're harming students right now. So some of these practices, if we can turn it around, we can begin to maybe shift the narrative and shift the outcomes. So some of the things that you can do, if you're still with me rocking on this video, are invest in the wellness of your teachers. If your staff isn't well, it's going to be hard for them to show up in their best way and not harm students, even unintentionally. Again, I love you teachers. I love administrators. I think most of the negative things that come out of our practices aren't intentional. We didn't get into this field to be mean. But I also know that when we're not well and we're walking into these jobs and these workplaces and these schools incredibly stressed and carrying more than we should, it's easy to unintentionally rupture relationships. I'm still using the phrase DEI, so I would encourage you to do something around DEI and understand how our biases can impact the way we show up for students. Whatever that looks like, it's still important. And then advocate. We are in a period in time right now where it's really important to look at what policies are being put through our government and through legislation. And, you know, if it's important for you to have good outcomes for education, reach out to your local school board. Reach out to this, the educate people who are invested and involved in policies that affect educational outcomes and educational funding and all those things. Whatever it looks like, try to do something around that. And read, empower yourself. Learn more about this. One book that I think is great in the concept of school to prison pipeline is Push Out by Monique Morris. Buy the book, support the author. Go to a local bookstore and buy it. Also, if you are interested in a facilitated workshop on that, you can go to tjromer.com, send a message. I'm also, if you're, we can do that. I'm happy to help. But also, if you just want a copy of the study guide, honestly, I'll provide a copy of that for free. If you just send me an email at tj@tjromer.com and say, hey, can I please get a copy of the Push Out Facilitator Guide? To me, the fact that you're willing to do the work, I'm willing to share the resource. So just reach out. And lastly, I just want to link up with everybody who, if you've watched this video to this level, it tells me your heart is in it for students and you want to pursue equity, you want to pursue justice, you want to pursue equal outcomes and just fair outcomes for all students. So if there's anything that I or our company can do to support you, please, follow. Actually, look on Instagram at TJ Romer Consulting. It's updated since this slide was made. And just know that I love you. I'm in your corner. And thank you. Let's keep doing great together.